This is Julia Meehling, representing the Friends of the Marshall Public Library in our oral history project. And today, on July the 16th, I'm visiting with Julia Meehling at her home on South Route 1, just south of Marshall. Julia did not grow up in Marshall, but she had an interesting family background and has been here now for a number of years and is certainly one of our residents. So with that, I'll introduce you to Julia.
Well, hello there. So this is going to be fun, I think. I've been pondering on those things that have happened in my life to share, and I guess we'll just kind of start at the beginning. My mom and dad met in St. Petersburg, Florida. Mom originally was from Brazil, Indiana. Dad basically settled there. His father traveled a lot, but he was born in Atlanta, Georgia. And Mom's parents moved to St. Pete to build a motel, and it was called the Patrician, after my mother, and they ran that for several years. It was near what was the dog track there, and Mom and Dad went to the same high school, which was St. Pete High, and basically Dad was a track runner. He liked running track, but they went to the same church, and that was a Presbyterian church in St. Pete. I don't recall the name of it, but that's where they met. That's where they got married. But interesting, Dad went into the Navy, and Mom had married and divorced at one time, but she was just having a hard time and trying to figure out what she was going to do with her life. And anyhow, Dad invited her down to Key West, Florida. That's where he was stationed, and at the naval base there in Key West, Florida. So basically they were visiting one evening, and Dad just was just thrilled to death to have my mother there. They'd been friends forever, but never had dated, never had really. They just were good friends, and like I said, just kind of hung in the same group, church group, same group of friends. And my mother made comment one time, said, Spud. My dad was nicknamed Spud after his dad. My dad's name was Howard, but everybody called him Spud. No, Dad didn't like the name Howard. He was a junior. And anyhow, my mother says, "So Spud, how, you remember that time when you said that you'd never ask another woman to marry you?" And he said, "Yeah." She says, "Well, here I am." So basically my mother proposed to my dad, which thrilled my dad because he was infatuated with my mother forever. And
you didn't have to figure out what to say, did you?
No, it was just, Mom just said it felt right, and she was very comfortable. They were best of friends, and so that's kind of how the start began. So Dad was in Key West, and eventually 1 year later I was born. They were married in August of 58. August 24th of 58, and I was born in September of 59. Now, my birthday is one of those unusual birthdays in history now. It wasn't then, but it was September 11th when I was born. So, anyhow, kind of a long time ago at this point. But then when I was 6 and a half in 1966, May 4th of 1966, my sister was born. And we had lived in military housing there in Key West. It was called Sigsbee Park. And I went to school at Sigsbee School, elementary school there. But with having another sibling in the house and 2 bedrooms. My parents thought we needed to expand our home, and we ended up renting a house on Harris Street. And very simply, we were only there a year. I went to 3rd grade in at a school there on the island of Key West, and that was Truman Elementary. And I don't even know if it's still there now or not, but that was,
I'll find out.
yeah, many years ago. And so we basically lived there a year in this really nice little house. We rented a house, and soon after that, my dad got a promotion with the Navy. Dad was never really that ambitious in the Navy. Mom wanted him to be more ambitious, but Dad was very comfortable just living his life. Very simple life. And so anyhow, he did get the promotion, and later on then he had an opportunity to do something else, and that was to become a recruiter for the Navy. So he had to go to some schooling, and while he was in schooling, we kind of did a vacation in St. Pete, living with my grandmother. And so I eventually, Dad was to settle into Atlanta, and it was either going to be Valdosta, Macon, or Atlanta. My mother really wanted Valdosta because it was closer to Florida. She loved Florida, and she cried when she found out my dad's orders were in Atlanta, Georgia. My dad was thrilled because he loved sports, and there was all kinds of sports and entertainment in Atlanta. So I began 4th grade at a school there that was called Hooper Alexander. Hooper Alexander. And it was located on Memorial Drive, which is a big street in Atlanta. It runs for miles. And we lived in an apartment. Mom and Dad very simply wanted to have more, and Dad wanted more for us. And
Julia, you mentioned your dad's name was Howard Spud, and your mother's name
Patricia.
But you didn't say their last name.
Oh, Rasmussen. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good old Norwegian name. People had a hard time spelling it. So my mother would say it's Ras, R-A-S, and mussin' around, she'd say. That was usually how she tried to explain our name. But yeah, so Howard Emmett and Patricia Lou. Mother hated the Lou. So everybody knew Mom as Pat. But yeah, so we basically lived in that apartment until a house was built. They decided they were going to build a house. So they built a house. We moved into that, and that was on Colony East Drive, 4252 Colony East Drive. And it was in the mailing zone of Stone Mountain. And loved that house. That house went through a lot of things. We had a full basement. It was a 3-bedroom home and 1.5 bath at the time, but through remodeling, basically we added another bedroom, or they would call it a mother-in-law quarters, I guess, in the basement. So it had a big room down there and a full bath down there, and then the other half was, you know, basically utility, and then a big family room. So yeah, so we had a really nice home there. And so I began 5th grade at Rowland Elementary, which was about a mile away, and usually never walked to school, but I always was able to walk home from school. So that was kind of a it was a busy street. It was actually on kind of a busy
Was there a
street.
bus route then? That you
Yeah, there was a bus route, but because I lived within a mile of the school, they really didn't run buses in our neighborhood. So parents usually would take us or pick us up, or you'd walk. And so I don't have any stories of walking through the snow and all that kind of stuff.
Not much snow in Atlanta.
No, not much snow. Ice storms, yes, but not much snow. And yeah, we had our share of ice storms, and that was kind of when we ended up having a gas heater put in, because all the power would go out and the city would just lock up, and it looked like a ghost town. So we would get our little gas heater on and be nice and toasty. And Mom had a camping stove, and we would cook on the camping stove, which camping was kind of our vacation. Whenever we really vacationed, we vacationed camping. And things started to expand, I guess, in my life. My mother had offered me tennis lessons and baton lessons and piano lessons, and I'd done all of that, and dance lessons. And but probably my at that, being 5th grade, probably the good thing that happened was my mother became a Girl Scout leader. And that was fun. That was something that my mother and I could do together, and of course my sister would tag along. And Dad eventually became a Girl Scout, a registered Girl Scout, and he was very proud of that. For some reason, he was actually a Boy Scout, but he was very proud that he was a registered Girl Scout. Not sure how that happened, but you could do it back then. And so yeah, we had Girl Scout meetings in our basement, and Mom was always very, very creative in her manner of teaching us things. We had lessons in poise and etiquette and all of that kind of stuff, and then we weren't afraid to try new adventures and things of that nature too. So we learned a lot. We did learn a lot. Mother loved to cook, and we'd learn to do cooking classes and things of that nature. But yeah, so basically my 5th, 6th, and 7th grade was really, those were good learning years. I finally was in a place where I was kind of getting established and getting friends and holding on to some friends. Before it was, I never really had an opportunity to have too many friends. I did have a friend from 4th grade when we first moved to Atlanta, and her family was originally from Savannah, Georgia. So I did a couple trips to Savannah, and with her family, I learned how to basically go crabbing, is what it was, and taking a chicken neck and wrapping a string around it and dropping it off the side of a boat, and you wait for a little bite and pull it up and scoop up your crabs and put them in a basket. And as soon as you got your basket filled, you went home and you cooked them in boiling water, and then you sat around the table and picked crab.
Have you kept in touch with any of those folks?
Her name was Dottie Bell. That was my friend, Dottie Bell. And no, I haven't. But I learned a lot. It was kind of like I started learning a little bit of that, Savannah lifestyle, I guess. But yeah. So, but other than that, I started having really good friends, at Roland Elementary, and then. High school began with 8th grade. Our high school ran from 8th grade. There was no middle school. It was 8th through 12th. And a lot of the girls in 7th grade did there was called Midway Park. And of course it had football, little league football and baseball and things of that nature. And I always saw these girls doing cheerleading cheerleading, I guess, not lessons, but cheerleading out on the playground, and I thought that was kind of interesting, and I was pretty athletic at the time. And actually, another friend of mine, Carrie Logan, and I were probably the most athletic, and we enjoyed playing with the boys because, you know, we liked playing kickball and baseball, and, you know, the swings and jungle gym and all that kind of stuff wasn't for us. We got out there and really played hard. So, but I kept seeing these girls doing these cheers, and I thought, well, that just sounded kind of interesting and fun. And so when I started 8th grade, I tried out for cheerleading, and it actually made it. I was kind of surprised because I had not really done that. All the other girls had been doing that for a while in the Little League, and I made cheerleading, so I was excited. And cheerleading became a big part of my life in high school. That was not always easy because you had a bunch of girls, and my mother always told me girls are like cats, and you got to be careful. They'll sneak up on you at the worst times. And so she was, you know, pretty right. I always had to be looking over my shoulder because I never knew when one of those girls was going to get nasty or be jealous of something or whatever. And so I learned a lot about life at that point in time. And loved the cheerleading, loved the games, loved the excitement of the crowd, loved the pep rallies, you know, loved everything about it, other than I had to deal with those other girls on the squad. So I never really became close or good friends with those girls. But what was the underlying secret to my sanity, I guess, with all of that, was that in 8th grade, I joined the 8th grade girls chorus. And my mother had always been a singer. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Mom in a little bit. But Mom had always been a singer, and so music was pretty popular there was always music going on in our household. So when I joined that chorus, I actually had fun, and there was contests and things that we did, and those were exciting, and it was kind of like another avenue that I kind of explored. And eventually was very involved in the music part of the choral end of it, I guess, not really all music, but just the choral end of music in our high school. And we did musicals. The guy that was directing us at that time was Stephen Burton, and better known as Steve or Mr. Burton. And he entertained us very well with the different music he would present to us, and sometimes we'd get a piece and we'd think it was just absolutely impossible. But when we mastered it, you know, it was euphoria for all of us. Yeah, it was just awesome. And we did that in a contest at one point, and got first ratings in every category. And man, we were walking on cloud 9 at that point in time. And those actually are the friends that I had in there are actually the friends that I grew very, very close to. One of them was a black boy who his teacher, or his mom was a teacher in my elementary school, Roland Elementary School. And she taught math, and she actually did PE with us a little bit and taught us science. But I became very good friends with Victor Wilson. And in the area that I lived in school there weren't many blacks in my community, in my area there. Slowly there started to become more, but Victor was the only black person in our elementary school, and that's because his mom taught there, and she brought him to the school to learn then. They didn't live in that neighborhood, but that's where she taught, and that's where he came to school. So Victor was one of the first friends that I really can say was just like very, very wise to things before his time.
He must have been well accepted then by the students.
He was. You could not help but love Victor.
At that time, would be kind of unusual.
And his mom was a jewel, an absolute jewel. So, of course, he liked to sing too. Oh, he was really good, very, very good. And so my friends then were really friends from the music department. And like I said, we did a lot of contests and things, but probably the musicals are the things that made us pull together. And that was a lot of people in different areas of the school really working together. So you got really close to people in other areas, where from building the set to painting to putting the whole thing together, the actual band or orchestra. And
was there a favorite musical that you had?
Well, let's see. We did Camelot, we did Oklahoma, and we did Sound of Music. I actually I was in the chorus in Camelot and Oklahoma. I actually had a role as Liesel in Sound of Music, though, and that was probably that kind of got my feet wet to actually having to learn lines. And actually, Sound of Music is my favorite movie. That I logged in at the age, I think, of 5. I think I was, or 5 or 6 when that movie came out. And my mom took me to a movie theater there in Key West, and that was kind of like I was in love with that movie. But my senior year, we did South Pacific, and I had the lead role in that. So, I was Nellie Forbush in that one, and that was fun. That was really, really fun. Of course, I had long hair, and the washing of the hair was a little tricky, but we managed. I washed the man right out of my hair in that one, but it was a lot of hair. I had very, very long hair. And so, that was kind of, like I said, music was just always real important. And probably because my mother, at a very young age, started taking voice lessons and developed her voice very well. She was a mezzo-soprano and very strong soprano. Mm-hmm. And at one point in her life, she had the opportunity to go to New York and sing opera. She had her bags packed, her train ticket, and she got scared and backed out. And so with that happening, that was probably the one regret in my mother's life. And she basically regretted that, because she said, I kind of wonder now what would that have done to my life. And so in raising my sister and myself, she basically raised us to, if we had opportunities, to grab onto them and to not be afraid of doing those things that maybe were a little fearful, but we learned a lot. And so in turn, I raised my kids to never fear those things. If you have an opportunity, go grab it, take it and run. But anyway, so I graduated from high school, though, and I was pretty sick of school at that point. I really did not know what I wanted to do. I tossed around anything from being a dental hygienist to being a PE teacher to really nothing at all, because I really didn't know what I wanted. And so I ended up laying off and working at a little business that was fairly new to the area. and it was called Atlanta Cutlery, and they were located down in Conyers, Georgia. And it eventually was they were more catalog, and then they opened up a little, I want to say little showroom type thing. But it was mainly just went in and packaged up knives and mailed them off, or knife, things to make knives. Anything from the handles to the rivets to, whatever. So people could buy their stuff from there and we'd ship it off. But the only other job I really had at that time was lifeguarding, and I had gotten a job at a apartment complex, and that was pretty interesting because that neighborhood was primarily a black neighborhood. And not that I was afraid of those people, because I'd grown up, not really judging people. I was told to be open to anybody and everybody. But it was a little intimidating, because I was there at the pool, opening it up and getting it ready, and all of a sudden I just start seeing all of those people, and for the first time in my life, I found out what it was like to be the minority.
Yeah.
So, but I was a tough one. They didn't like me because I was tough, but I knew that I had to go in being tough, and because they had not had anybody there in the apartment complex, was really concerned about the fact that there was nobody down there to control the kids. So
you were it then.
I was it. I was your police of the pool area, and but eventually it was a good thing too. I learned a lot there, and of course the kids learned. There are rules, and if you abide by those rules, everything's fine. It's when you don't abide by those rules that we have trouble. And so, it was, again, another learning experience, but I really enjoyed that time. And so a year off of school and just working and lifeguarding, and then I eventually said, all right, I'll go back to school. So I signed up with a junior college there. It was DeKalb Community College, I think, and it was basically a stepping stone to going to any one of the other big universities there in the Atlanta area, and it was local. It was close by. So I actually did that and worked, and tried at different times. I tried taking the classes during the day and working half a day, and then I got to where I needed the income because I had bought a car and I had a car payment and insurance. So then it was, okay, well, let's flip this around. I'll work all day and take classes at night, and started doing that, and actually was doing that for a while. But it turned out that my family, we were a little bit closer to my mom's side of the family, more connected and seeing them often more so than we were like my dad's side of the family. And, not that we didn't see my dad's side of the family, we just didn't socialize as much with them. So, literally we would come up and visit with my great aunt Florence Baldwin in Brazil, and the cousins would gather, and because my mother was an only child, and so all the cousins would gather, and we'd have like a mini family reunion there and catch up with everybody. And a lot of times, all the older folks, as I would look at it as, were telling the old stories from long ago, and it'd get a little boring for a young kid. So my mother would call up her cousin, and that would be Dolores Meehling, and better known as Dodie, and would say, hey, I got a girl here that needs to come to the farm. And so lo and behold, I'd come to the farm. And I would visit with my cousins here. So my cousins being Beth and Fred and Amy and Alan. And always was interesting because I usually hung out with Amy and Fred. They were the closest to my age. So we would do anything from bike riding to later on when we were teenagers, we would swim in the gravel pit, and oh yeah, we did all that kind of stuff. And did a lot of just fun things that were known to be cruising through town. That was kind of the thing that everybody did.
Things you did not do in Stone Mountain or Atlanta.
No, we played hide and go seek, on the farm, and I remember hiding. I always hid in the corn because the corn stalks were tall, and I thought nobody could find me in there. I didn't realize I was dealing with like professional hide and go seekers because they always knew where I was. I tried hiding in between the beans, the green beans that were being grown in a garden there at Doty's. And I laid down in between, and I was good for a while, but they were just really good at that hide and go seek game. But yeah, we just had fun. We played in the sand pile, and I remember throwing sand up against the side of the garage one time, and because it was wet and it was cold, and watching the sand slide down the side of the garage. And of course, Fred and Amy's dad, John, I'm gonna kick your butts if you keep doing that. And of course, I didn't think he was really gonna do it, but then I got a look at his face and realized I think he meant it. So we quit throwing the sand on the side of the garage. But yeah, we just did fun things. I got to see a cow being milked, and I got to see the eggs being taken out of the nest of the chickens, and there were rabbits there, and got to watch the rabbits. And I learned a lot about the farm, and just was very intrigued with the lifestyle and knowing that all these good things came from whether it be the animals or the ground, watching the stuff grow in the garden. And that was always intriguing to me. And I thought I had always been kind of an outdoorsy girl, or considered myself, somewhat very simple girl. But, there was more of a simple life here. But anyway, so like I said, I would come and spend time up here when we'd have these mini family reunions over in Brazil, Indiana. So eventually I just very, very fond of, coming over here. And at one point then, it was one summer, it was the summer of 79. And Amy was getting married. And she had asked my mother to come sing at her wedding. And my mother, at that time, had started her own business. She was catering, and my mom would work at the high school during the day. She was called a paraprofessional, and all those other free hours were spent doing catering and very little sleep. My mother was one that could live on no sleep, or 3 or 4 hours, or a 20-minute cat nap. And so she developed her catering business. And so my mom had to decline because she had 2 weddings that same weekend that Amy was getting married. And so my mother volunteering me and said, well, you might want to give Julia a chance. She sings. And next thing I know, I'm being told I'm singing for a wedding. I'm singing for Amy's wedding.
Was that the first wedding you had done?
That would have been the second wedding. I had been asked to sing at another wedding, and I had only sang one song at that. But this was a little bit more involved, and so of course, I don't know who picked out the music, but it was music that I was not used to singing. So I have a feeling my mother had something to do with that, because it was a little bit more classical or a little bit more churchy. I don't know what you would call it, but it was not what I was accustomed to singing at that time. So that opened my eyes to a lot of other notes and areas and things that I just was not familiar with. But came up here for that wedding. I came in on a Wednesday night, I believe, and Beth came and picked me up from the airport. She and her friend came and picked me up, and the next morning, I found out that the family had just finished wrapping up their planting and their work they were doing in the fields at that time. Which, keep in mind, I knew nothing really about the farming situation. You know, I knew they farmed, but didn't know what all was involved. And so, anyhow, Fred and I had always been really close. We again, I was close with Amy and Fred, and my mother, prior to my coming up here for this wedding, to sing for this wedding, said to me, "Well, you're going to be seeing Fred, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah." But she knew Fred and I had always been really close. We really just clicked, and of course my mother remembers the filming, you know, back in the old days when they had the cameras. That I guess Dad had a little, you know, camera that could film. They took a picture of me leaning out of the car and Fred leaning up to kiss me goodbye after one of our visits here. So who knew what was to come? But I don't know, maybe Mom did. But I was dating and actually pretty interested in a gentleman at that time. But my mom kind of, I don't know, she just had this like gut feeling or something, I don't know. But anyway, she said, "Well, you're going to see Fred when you go." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm going to see Fred." And so anyhow, but next thing I know, Amy's busy with her stuff. So of course I really couldn't hang with Amy because Amy was doing all her wedding stuff. And so I hung with Fred. Fred was kind of in charge of making sure that I got where I needed to be, the practice for the music and all of that kind of stuff. And so I just hung with him. Well, by the time it came time for me to, the wedding was on Saturday, and Fred's friend was getting married at the same weekend, but it ended up, they moved their wedding to Sunday. So Fred was in that one, or maybe, I'm trying to think if he was in that one now that or if we just went. But anyway, we ended up going, I can't remember now if he was in the wedding, but anyway, we ended up going to that wedding. And I had a flight back that I had to catch. So he sees that I get back to the airport. And he kept saying to me, "Why don't you move up here? Why don't you move here?" And I'm thinking, why do I need to move here? Well, Fred, in one of his conversations, had said to me, "I think I could marry you." And I just kind of pushed that off. And he says, "Sure." And I'm like, "We can't get married. We're cousins." And he says, "Sure we can. We can get married." I said, "I don't think we can. We're cousins." Because you see, my mother and Dodie, Fred's mother, were first cousins. Their dads were brothers. So the common name there was Bradshaw. Mm-hmm. So there were 7 Bradshaw brothers. And turns out that my mom and Dodie were first cousins, and Fred apparently, I don't know, either had checked this out or knew this, or I don't know. But anyway, he just kept pushing for me to move here. And I said, well, what would your mother and father think? And he says, it's my life. It's not their life. But I really had not even pondered on that sort of thing. You know, I was dating a guy and I thought everything was okay, but I was still questioning a lot of things about that relationship too. So needless to say, I go back that Sunday evening, and this boyfriend of mine picks me up, and I end up having a piece of luggage that gets tore up at the airport, and they were announcing my name over the PA system, and I said, did you hear that? And he says, I didn't hear anything. Let's get going. Let's get your stuff and get going. Well, I'm missing a bag. And finally, this gentleman says to me, are you missing a bag? And I said, well, yeah, I can't find my other bag. And he says, well, it's over here. And the way my boyfriend behaved at that time was not very becoming. Because, of course, I had to get all this information, and they were going to replace the bag and all of this. But my boyfriend was really not behaving very well.
Not very patient, huh?
No. And that upset me. And then later on that week, he wanted me to go to one of his softball games. And I'm like, I don't really know those people. You play softball with these people. I really don't know those people. Because you have to understand, down there, church softball was really big. The church leagues were really big down there. And I didn't go to his church. His church was a Baptist church. I went to a Presbyterian church when I did go. And then he had gotten this truck that he was going to work over, and the steering on it, you had to keep turning that wheel for ever and ever and ever to get the thing to turn. Should not have been out on the road driving it.
I think so.
But he decides he wants to teach me how to drive this truck this one day. And I nearly hit a car, and I mean, I'm in a mess, because it's the stick shift on, you know, on the column, and I'm not familiar with that. I know how to drive stick shift down, you know, on the floor, but trying to learn that, and then this wheel that you turn 60 times before you get it to really turn. And by the time, I was a mess. I was an absolute mess. Well, I have to say that I don't know if I was looking for an excuse or if that was the actual straw, final straw that broke the camel's back, but I called it quits with that relationship. I just didn't see where that guy had my interest and my back, and I just called a halt to it. So, of course, after I did that, then you always have those second thoughts of, what have I done? Well, stupid me calls up Fred, and I'm boo-hooing to Fred about this relationship that I had, and oh, it hurts, and I feel so bad. And he was very reassuring that, yes, it'll be painful for a while, but, you know, these things happen. And I'm thinking, this guy's really pretty cool. I mean, he's supporting me in this failed relationship and backing me.
A little compassion for
you.
you.
Yeah, I'm like, this is, you know, and then I'm thinking, how stupid. Who does this sort of thing? But next thing I know, he's slipping in there. Well, don't you think it's probably time for you to move this way? And I get to thinking, well, I'm not tied to anything. I can get a job there. If I decide I want to go to school there, I could go to school there. Of course, I was taking a few classes at that time at night. And I said, well, I couldn't move there till after my school's over with. I would want to finish up my school, my classes. Well, that's fine. So, lo and behold, we were actually having a mini family reunion on my mom's side with Dodie in that side of the family, which we'd never really done that part of the family. And Dodie was having it at her house. So Fred suggests, I'm going to rent an apartment. I said, well, don't rent an apartment. No, there's a new apartment being built. I'm going to rent that apartment. You bring some of your stuff when you come for the family reunion in July. Now keep in mind, June was Amy's wedding. July is when we're coming for this family reunion. So my dad loaded up a bunch of my stuff in the back end of a pickup truck and had this platform that my sister and I and the dog would lay on. And we actually traveled as a family up for the family reunion to Marshall, Illinois. And unloaded some of my stuff into this empty apartment. And I thought maybe Fred would have moved in to this apartment and he would have just stored my stuff, you know. But no, he literally rented an empty apartment for this whole month that nobody was living there. And we decided that I would move, I think it was kind of like Labor Day weekend, that sort of weekend in the first part of September of '79. And so I ended up doing the official move. Fred comes down to move me. His friends that had gotten married on that Sunday after Amy had gotten married had not taken a honeymoon. And they said, sure, we'll drive the extra car. So they've come down to Atlanta with Fred. They drive Fred's car. Fred drives my car. They pull the U-Haul trailer that has all of my shoes. Fred didn't know that one woman could have that many shoes. And whatever clothes and whatever belongings that I had left. And I had a Toyota Corolla at the time, no air conditioning. And he moved me to Marshall, Illinois. So I move into this apartment on 4th Street. And live in this apartment. Well, the thing is, when I moved here, it was a different situation. I was in a different situation because when Fred came down to move me, he came to my work because it was my last day. It would have been on a Friday. It was my last day to work. And showed up at the place, and so I got to introduce him to all of the people around and said, well, this is the guy that's thinking I need to move to Marshall, Illinois. And he proposes to me and has a ring. I don't know if it was just a weak moment, a smart moment, but it was a moment. And I accepted the proposal. And so I was moving to Marshall, Illinois as an engaged woman. And very simply, my mother, being that she was a planner, a caterer, always thinking ahead, says, well, wouldn't it be nice if you got married in November? I'm like, I'm moving in September and I'm married in November? Is that possible? Sure, it's possible. So I ended up getting married November 24th of 1979. Only 24 weeks after my cousin Amy, Fred's sister, had gotten married. So there was a lot of preparation that took place. Fred was Catholic. I wasn't Catholic. I had to learn about the Catholic faith, to understand the Catholic faith. We went to classes. That basically moved me towards an area that I had never really explored much. I'd gone to church, believed in God. You know, I had faith. I just didn't know if I had what everybody else had. But I had always admired the Catholic faith. I was always intrigued by the Catholic faith because I had friends that were Catholic, and I would hear them talk about giving up something for Lent. Well, I didn't really know what that meant. I hadn't been educated in that sort of thing. Or, you know, they were having to go to Mass. Well, what's Mass? Or they would have to go to confession. What's confession? Confession of what? What do you confess? So there were a lot of things that I really didn't understand about the Catholic faith. But after meeting with Father Otta, who was at the time the priest here, I fell in love with the Catholic faith. And for some reason, I guess, we just never know why things happen in our lives until they happen, and then you look back and you think it was just going to happen no matter what. That destiny, I guess. So I became Catholic, and so when Fred and I planned our wedding, we planned a wedding in Atlanta. So that was going to be a little awkward because he'd only gone to this Catholic church, but he was willing to do whatever. He was getting, I guess he thought, the prize package. So he was very accommodating, very understanding, but a lot of plans had to be done. And so my mother planned that. Keep in mind, I just agreed because my mother had really good ideas. I thought, let's do it Thanksgiving weekend because your friends would be out of school. They could come to the wedding. It'd be a weekend that people could travel in their jobs. They'd be open to being able to come and just be the perfect time. Okay, so in Marshall, Illinois, they ended up chartering a bus, loaded up this bus with people from Marshall, friends of the family, relatives of the family, and traveled to Atlanta, Georgia on Thanksgiving Day. Well, my mother had already, again, she's a planner, had already made plans to have Thanksgiving dinner at this hotel where everybody was staying. And so the hotel called and said, your bus has arrived. My mother said, everybody, let's go. And we all had our jobs. We were to pick up, grab, carry, load up, and Thanksgiving dinner loaded into the vehicles and off to this hotel. While they're settling in, while the Marshall people are settling into their rooms, we are down in a room setting out a spread of Thanksgiving dinner for them. And so that began our wedding extravaganza for the weekend. And we got married on Saturday in the afternoon and had a nice reception in Avondale Estates. There was a place there where it was a country club there, and we had a nice reception there. And Fred and I spent our honeymoon in Helen, Georgia, which is a little alpine village. And very German kind of buildings, and a lot of the stuff is geared towards the German culture. But it rained the whole weekend. I mean, it rained on my wedding day, it rained on Sunday, it rained on Monday, and by Tuesday, I mean, because it just poured buckets. And we weren't able to, explore and do things that normal people go and do, when they have time to do that kind of stuff on their honeymoon. And 3 days in a hotel room was enough for Julia and Fred. So we just basically took off for Atlanta and went back, cut our honeymoon short, went back to Atlanta. And my mother says, well, I wasn't expecting you. Well, we weren't expecting you to come back, but it's not raining here for some reason. So anyhow, we picked up what gifts were left, and we then headed back to Marshall, Illinois to begin our life. So it was kind of a very busy time, and my mother wanted me to come back in December then for Christmas, and I was exhausted by this point. There was just a lot that had happened in the months since June when I had come up to sing for Amy's wedding. And I was exhausted by that point, and so anyhow, I basically said, well, it's time for me to just stay put. My mother cried and cried and cried and cried, and just couldn't believe that I wasn't coming home for Christmas. And she said, this is never going to happen again. We're never going to spend another Christmas apart. So she made it her mission to make sure that we always had Christmas together. So anyhow, Fred and I developed basically an understanding that we would have to go back to Georgia once in a while. But in that first year, I ended up having our first son, Matthew. And Matthew was, named after my grandfather, my mom's dad. And that was where we got the Matthew from. I had always heard that name. I never knew my grandfather, but always had known that name and just thought that was a really strong name and decided that was what I was going to name my son. And so Matthew was born, and we ended up, I say over the years, Matthew and I grew up together. I mean, I was only 20 years old when I had Matt. And just shy of my 21st birthday. But we grew up together. I had a lot of growing up to do. And we've done that. We've laughed about that through the years. But in that time, I was learning about the area. Of course, my mother just couldn't believe that I was going to, live in this little small town. I remember her saying to me, Julia, are you sure this is what you want to do? Sure, this is what I want to do. And she said, well, I lived in a small town. I know what that's like, and everybody knows your business.
That's right.
And I said, I can handle it, and I have nothing to hide. It's my business, and I just have to be a good person so that I know that nobody has anything to sit there and talk about. And she says, well, that's all fine in theory, she said, but people talk. So I had never, like I said, never lived in a small town, didn't know what small town was, but I quickly knew because I became, oh, you're Fred's wife. And I found out I really didn't have a name at that time. I was Fred's wife. And then they would ask eventually, oh, so what is your name? Oh, well, I'm Julia. So then it became, because later on I was known as the singer. Oh, you're the one that sings. Yes, I'm the one that sings. And I can probably thank the Catholic Church, because I sang in the church, but I can also thank Ed Pierce, because that was kind of how, outside of the Catholic Church community, people knew that I was starting to sing, or that I was a singer in Marshall. So I sang for a lot of funerals. And eventually, a wedding was thrown in there every now and then. Sang at the nursing home, Burnside's nursing home, sang out there for maybe their monthly birthday party or whatever. And then later on, Karen Elsoff and myself would just kind of perform at different things. We became kind of like the little duo, and we would sing at different things. So I became as the person that sang in Marshall. So I learned a lot, though. I learned how to garden from Fred's aunt, Eleanor Macy. And that woman knows how to put out a garden now. We had such a huge garden, I just couldn't believe how large a garden we could have. She was usually the one that worked it. I was dealing with the little kid, and I wasn't used to that, getting up and weeding the garden or hoeing the garden of a morning. I mean, that was not my thing. I was taking care of a kid usually. But when it came fall, or the end of summer, well, actually when things started ripening, I mean, throughout the summer, we started putting things together in the freezer or in cans, and did a lot of canning, and basically learned a lot about that. Never fell in love with the idea of doing canning and freezing, but I knew it had to be done because that's what they did around here to prepare for the winter. Everybody wanted to stockpile their freezers and shelves with stuff. And Fred and I decided we wanted another child. So eventually, 4 years later, I had Amanda, and was a little concerned because Amanda looked like she was going to be born on the same day as Matt. But Amanda being, and I know this now, she was a strong-willed child. She wasn't going to have that. She was going to have her own day. So she decided to come early. So she came a day ahead of Matt. So they share birthdays basically almost 4 years apart, minus 1 day. And so we ended up having Amanda, and Fred and I lived in this. We moved out of that apartment uptown, within just a few months after we were married, and moved into a house that John and Dodie had as rental property. So we rented from them. And that was on Lower Park Road. And it was the old Drummond place is what they call, I guess. There were several kids raised. The Drummond family had several children, and they raised them in this little house. I do not know how that was done, but because it was a tiny house, but it was done. I've been told that was done, and I'm gonna believe it. But we lived there, and as our family started growing, of course, we realized we needed to start finding a place for ourselves. So we'd been looking for a while, and eventually we found the home that now we have lived in since 1986. And in that time, in those few years, basically I became a mother. I was a wife, a mother, a singer. Then I decided that I needed to try to help with income, so I decided to go to work as a Tupperware dealer. So I sold Tupperware for a while, and became a manager with them, had the car, was dealing with that, that new area of business that I had never really tapped into, of sales. And then trying to, of course, to recruit new dealers in different areas. Well, there was a snowstorm that took me up to, well, I say took me to a different area in my life, because I had gone to Charleston to meet with somebody to try to recruit them to be a Tupperware dealer, and this huge snowstorm took place very fast. Snow was coming down. I'm trying to drive home in this snowstorm from Charleston. I'm seeing cars all over the place, especially around that big old Westfield curve there. And I'm trying to make it home because my kid's getting off the bus. And he waited for me for about a half an hour in the barn because I just couldn't get to him fast enough. And I vowed that day this would never happen again. And we didn't have a key for him to get in. I was always home. I was always there when he got off the bus. But that day, that snowstorm changed a lot. So I vowed I would never work outside of Marshall again. And but funny how things happen. The Pizza Hut was advertising that they wanted people to come work, and I thought, well, that's close to home. It's a new business. It'd be a hot business. It's a pizza place in Marshall. Never have waited tables. My mother encouraged me, you can do this. I waited tables when I was in college, and you can do this. And you helped with catering. You can do this, Julia. So found out I could do it. I was able to do it. And so that was kind of like the second job that I had. Next thing I know, I'm working there, doing very well in my job. 2 ladies are there coming in for lunch on a regular basis, and that would be Ann Sutton and Sandy Atkins, and they were having lunch there one day, and they worked at what was then First National Bank in Marshall. And they said, well, we just had somebody that quit. Have you ever thought about, I'm Zoom brooming the floor, I'm cleaning the floor, I'm cleaning up after the lunch crowd. And they're like, you're a hard worker. Have you ever thought about working at a bank? And I'm like thinking, really? I'm a waitress in this pizza place, and you think I can work at a bank? They said, come fill out an application. And I said, yeah, okay, all right. You know, I wasn't looking for a job. I was perfectly happy doing what I was doing. Well, that wasn't good enough. I ended up having to work later because somebody didn't come in for their shift. Sandy Atkins calls the pizza place and says, you haven't come picked up the application yet. I said, well, I'm having to work over. And she says, well, I'll bring you the application. So she brings me the application. Next day, I wasn't working at the Pizza Hut, but I filled out the application, and I just went into the bank and dropped it off. And kid on the hip, and, you know, just dropped off the application, wanted to bring this in. And they're like, oh, well, we need to set up an interview. And I'm thinking, oh, my goodness. You haven't even looked at my application yet. Well, no, we need to set up an interview. Okay, well, so I told them the next time I was available. And we set up a time a few days later. So I, of course, knew that time, because I was just in shorts and a t-shirt with a kid on the hip when I dropped the application off. I dress up, of course. I know how to dress up. So I had my black skirt on, my red blouse on, my jacket, and I go in for my interview. No kid on the hip this time. But got interviewed, and it was funny because the president at the time, Dale Adams, said, I would like for you to meet somebody that you would be working with. Her name is Phyllis Burris. She's our head bookkeeper, and I'd like for her to meet with you. Well, I think he was trying to get a feel if there would be a connection. And so anyway, she comes in, and as soon as she walks in, I recognize her. She recognizes me. She said, I know you. And I said, well, you look very familiar too. And she says, weren't you at a Tupperware party?
Yeah.
I said, yes, I was. And she said, well, I thought so. She said, I mean, it's been a long time ago, but she said, I remember you were pregnant and you had a hard time getting out of the couch. Well, that couch had a seat that went to the floor. And it's true, I was very large and basically couldn't crawl out of that couch for anything. And she's the one that gave me a hand and pulled me up out of there. But she was the actual Tupperware dealer at the time. So, anyhow, it was kind of like we just hit it off. I remember her asking me, have you ever ran a 10 key? And I had no idea. I had never worked in a bank. I'd never worked in a business like that. And I looked at her. I said, I'm sorry, I don't know what a 10 key is. She said, well, do you know how to run a calculator? I said, well, yeah, I know how to run a calculator. You'll be fine. We'll teach you. She says, she said, do you type? Well, now keep in mind, one of those classes that I was taking that I wanted to finish up before I moved up here to Marshall, Illinois, was a typing class. My first and only typing class I took in college that summer before I got married. Had no need for typing after I moved here. I said, well, I took a typing class once. No problem. We'll teach you. Well, now I'm petrified because I actually got the job.
What do I do now?
Exactly. I am as nervous can be. I think I'm way in over my head. But I will tell you, Phyllis Burris was an awesome teacher, boss, friend. I remember her sitting me down in front of they called it a CRT at the time, keyboard, sitting in front of me. And she says, okay, well now keep in mind, anything that goes in here, we can fix.
Oh, gosh.
So anything you type in, we're okay, we can fix it. Well, that was her way of trying to calm my nerves, because I'm sure I was probably shaking in the seat at that time. But you know what? Learned it, became very comfortable with it. I remember her saying also, okay, I want you to start using all your fingers on that adding machine. Because I was a one-finger person on that adding machine. That wasn't good enough for Phyllis. All our fingers, we need to use all our fingers on that adding machine. I said, well, show me how that's done. So watching her, and I said, okay, I will try. Well, keep in mind, I was pretty good with the one finger. Well, now I'm slowed up considerably. I said, well, I'm not going as fast. That's okay. I want you using all your fingers. Well, I became pretty good at using all my fingers. And that then led me to, we had a proof machine in that room at that time. And so literally you were inputting all this information on this little, all these numbers and everything. And I got pretty good at running that proof machine too. And I remember saying one time, I hate filing. Well, that wasn't what you said to Phyllis. You never said you hated to do a job, because Phyllis would say, you're going to do that job till you learn to love it. So 2 things were learned in that. I learned to love filing. It was kind of like relaxing to do it. I could do it, and it was kind of a mindless job. But also learned to keep my mouth shut. Yeah, I was very careful as to what I said then. And but absolutely loved the job there. I felt like the job became too political for me. It was the political process of the banking industry, and I wasn't very comfortable in that. So I left that job and soon went back to Pizza Hut. But that wasn't enough income, because I had upped my income at that time, and that wasn't enough income coming from Pizza Hut. So I ended up working what they considered full-time at Walmart then. And I did anything from scanning to working the cash office. Eventually was out at the customer service desk doing layaways or whatever else, returns and everything else. So learned a lot. That was another area where I learned a lot. After a little over a year, I think it was, of working there, as Walmart being my full-time and Pizza Hut being my backup, the manager, Pam Masuga, at that time at the Pizza Hut, asked me if I would be interested in becoming assistant manager at the Pizza Hut. And I thought, wow, I'd only have one place that I'd have to worry about a schedule, not 2 places. And so I eventually then chose to be assistant manager at the Pizza Hut, and learned a lot about business there, and a lot about the cooking part, because I was only a waitress at the time, but learned a lot about the actual whole process of running a restaurant, or at least a pizza place. And always joking around. I mean, it was always a nice place where you could joke around. And I remember saying this one time, or thinking this one time, April Fool's Day is coming up, and I'm going to tell Pam I'm pregnant. And I said, I got that day, and I went in, and it was April Fool's Day, and I'm thinking, maybe I shouldn't say that, because that could jinx me. So I didn't say anything. I mean, but that thought was still there, you know. It would be kind of funny just to see her face. Well, I don't know. It's that divine intervention says, hold your mouth, Julia, hold your tongue. Because that Easter, I am singing at the Easter Vigil, and I all of a sudden pass out. We'll just call it I passed out, because I basically, my vision went smaller and smaller and smaller. I got hotter and hotter. Ended up sitting on the bench that was up there in the choir loft, and George Macy leans into my ear, who he had a little familiar area of working with people in situations like this, and whispers in my ear and says, "Julia, are you pregnant?" And I just remember lifting my head with this cool rag on the back of my neck and saying, "I don't know." So that following Monday, I got a pregnancy test. Sure enough, I was pregnant with our third child. And I remember saying to my husband, "Well, you haven't gotten your farmer yet. If you want this one to be your farmer, you better work a little bit harder at that area." And when we found out it was a boy, it was like, okay, that's a start. Little did I know that my little boy was going to be practically a walking, talking, spitting image of my husband. So God has a way of being very humorous. And I know he chuckles a lot, because all I could think of was Dodie, my mother-in-law, had dealt with this type of a child in Fred. This kid, you could not keep him from climbing. You could not keep him from playing with tractors or in the dirt. He was not a kid that liked playing with puzzles or Legos or Tinker Toys or Lincoln Logs, which all those things were things that Matt had loved to play with. And Amanda loved playing with those things, but she also liked her Barbies. But this kid was just totally different. And he as he has grown, he walks like Fred, he talks like Fred, he really sounds like Fred, he acts just like Fred. And Fred got his farmer, because Adam has a love for farming too.
I think he's a clone.
I think so too. I think so too. So at this point, you know, Fred and I have 3 kids, and obviously I wanted to be, I was very important, it was very important to me to be in my kids' lives when they were infants. And so, you know, I didn't work when my kids were very young. You know, I started doing Tupperware when Amanda was 2 years old, but, or about 1.5 years, I guess. But I was still there for those primary months in the beginning for her, and still was considerably there when I did Tupperware, because I did those things, my Tupperware parties at night, and, you know, Fred was home to take care of the kids at that point. But at this point, I'm working at Pizza Hut, and, you know, very much concerned about how do people do this shuffling with a job and a kid. And I didn't like the idea of having somebody else raise my child, and so I chose to quit Pizza Hut and go back to being just mom. And the 2 older kids loved it because I was around a little bit more. And Fred was very supportive and said, "We'll make it, we'll be fine, don't worry. We know how to live, you know, very small," and you know, it was not something we weren't used to doing, because we were always very conservative with whatever we did in our spending. So we went back to that stage a little bit. And I was just getting to know this child, because really I had been working up to the point of having him. And I had only basically backed off on my schedule at Pizza Hut up to about 2 weeks before I actually had him. So, yeah, my mother was very concerned at that point too, that my motherhood was not going to be as good as what it had been in the beginning with the first two, because I had 1 month before I had Adam, my mother says, "You're not even prepared for this child." I said, "I got rid of all that stuff a long time ago. That baby stuff went out the door. It's gone." And she says, "You have a baby coming into this house. You have to do something to get ready for this baby." "Mother, it'll be fine. In the old days, they used to bring out a drawer, put a padding in it. That was the baby's bed. You know, we can do that. I can empty out a drawer and we'll make a bed for this baby. We'll be fine." "Julia, you have to be thinking about this. You don't even have any clothes." "Mom, it's fine. We'll pick up some stuff. It'll be fine." So, lo and behold, family puts together a shower for me, a baby shower, and I got the start of all those baby things again. But, yeah. So, Matt was 14 and Amanda was 10. And I remember Matt coming home from school and saying, "Mom, everybody was laughing today." And I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, we were studying the reproductive system." I said, "Okay." He said, "Yes." And everybody just kept looking at me like, "Your mom and dad are having a baby." And I said, "Well, we are not dead, honey." So that was the first lesson of Matt learning, probably, about the birds and the bees, as we say. But Matt was a very, very good, supportive person in having Adam come into our family. Matt was very good with Amanda. Again, I call her my challenge child, because I often said if Amanda had been the first, there would not have been any other children, because she was a very determined child. I knew that as a quality would be good as an adult, but as a child, and you're trying to...
You never know.
Yeah, you're trying to rally the kids together to get somewhere, and her being a little bit, just very set in her ways was just challenging. But we laugh about it now, because it was actually documented in her medical records by the pediatrician, that she was a very determined child. And so anyway, which has proven to be a good thing. I mean, she's done very well for herself. So, but my kids, like I said, they were very, it was very important for me to be there in the beginning for them.
And you went back into banking for a while.
I did, yeah. I actually, after I had Adam, I wanted a little bit of pocket money just to be able to buy something for the kids every now and then. So I ended up cleaning the church and the rectory at the time for Father Jeff Grant, when he was here, and Sister Therese McKinnon. And so that was my little pocket money, and I would take Adam and we'd go to the church and I would clean, or I would go to the rectory and I would clean. So that was kind of my start of getting back into the working field. And a little bit after that, it was getting time where, we needed to start having some more income back in. And I did. I had an opportunity to go back into banking. There was a girl that was part-time at it was First Bank and Trust at the time. It's now called First Bank, and First Bank of Marshall is where I worked. And but the girl was going part-time, and they were wanting somebody to go full-time. So I ended up filling out an application, got hired on, went back into banking, and was thrilled because I really enjoyed that work. I really, really I just really felt like I found my little niche. And so I went back into banking, and very quickly was recognized that I had some skill And so soon went from being a teller, and at that time when I went into, they were transferring from one system to another. So I not only had to learn the new system on how to process stuff, because they were still running that system, but I had to start learning the new system that they were going to be going to. And but you know, I was up for the challenge, and very quickly caught on, and eventually got moved into the new accounts area, and was in a position of you know, knowing a little bit more about the running of things and more of a supervisorship role. And so I loved my work there, but that again, I don't deal very well when the politics of things take place in a business. And again, there was a lot of political stuff going on, and I loved my branch, but it was the higher up area that I didn't agree with, and I very soon said, it's time to move on. Did not want to do that, but in order for me to not go back to a place of, I don't know, just not liking to go to work because I was having to deal with the political part of it, I just chose to leave there. So I set my date that I was going to leave there as of March 31st. And that was, let's see, that was, gosh, 7 or 8 years ago now. I'm trying to remember now when that was. And the only reason I would have to go back and figure on that, because I think it's 8 years ago. Because I really didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing. I just set that date as the day I was leaving, and I would deal with the rest later, figure out what I was going to do later. Well, at the time I was preparing mentally to leave the bank and trying to figure out what I was going to do, I was listening and keeping my eyes open and ears open for opportunity. And there were a couple things that kind of came my way, something that a couple things I really didn't know if I would really care for, but I had word that friends of ours, Bill and Lori King, which Bill is Dr. King, the chiropractor, one of the chiropractors in Marshall, and they were surprised by a pregnancy. Their third child, after having 2 boys that were older. I knew exactly what they were going through. Fred knew exactly what they were going through. So Fred and I kind of tapped in and said, you know, we know where you're headed. You know, we know what you're going through. Welcome to the club. But Lori had come into the bank. This is when I was still at the bank, and Lori had come into the bank and had said, Julia, you know, if you hear of anybody, we're trying to find somebody to come in, and when I have our child, you know, to come in and work in the office. I never had the opportunity to, you know, stay at home with our newborns when Bill was beginning his practice. So I'd like to take that opportunity now, but we're going to need somebody in the office. And I said, well, I'll keep my eyes and ears open. Of course I was doing that already. And I asked her, what kind of person are you looking for? And she basically said, you know, well, somebody that's positive and easy to work with. And I kind of considered myself somebody that was of that nature, but I didn't tell her that. So I came home and I told Fred, I said, hey, I said, I think I could do Lori's job. She and Bill are looking for somebody to come in. He goes, really? I said, yeah. He said, why don't you check it out? I said, well, yeah, I'm going to think on it. Well, that wasn't good enough for my husband. My husband decides he's going to, when he sees Bill, hey, Bill, sure, you might be interested in that job. And Bill says, really? He says, yeah, because she's leaving the bank. She is? Yeah, she's leaving the bank. Well, then we'd like to talk to her. So I met with them for lunch. He basically said, what's your idea? Here's our ideas. We kind of came together, and he basically offered me the job, and I said, hey, I think I can do that. Well, once again, I'm learning another area of business, and I had gotten my insurance license when I had worked at the bank, life insurance, and then life and health insurance license when I worked at the bank. So I kind of had a little bit of an idea of how insurance worked, but I didn't know how it worked from the medical side, you know, from an office side. So I learned real quick on how things worked, and I had a month of training before Lori left, and she said, I'm just a phone call away. I said, that's good to know. And lo and behold, I've been in that position then till now. I mean, I'm still doing their billing and insurance for them. And in that time, it's been a real learning experience, and I love my job. I jokingly said, but actually really meant, if I can't get along with the doctor and his wife, then there must be something wrong with me. Well, so far we're doing good. We're doing good so far, and I enjoy working for them. They
both seem like very pleasant individuals.
They are
having
great
rented
people
from them for so many years.
Yeah.
Just great people to have in the community.
They're good people. They're good people. So that's where I'm at. That's our story. And
well, I know that guy called Fred.
Yeah.
Has expanded a little bit over the years. About how many acres does he farm now?
You know, I never really know. I know that sounds stupid, and I probably should know that kind of stuff. When I started learning about the farming, what little and very little I know about the farming, I knew it wasn't my expertise. And I knew, and Fred was always very good to share with me what he was doing, and I would always just shake my head in agreement because I didn't know anything about farming. So whenever Fred has made decisions about farming,
Yes.
I just go along with it because he's had very good gut feeling, intuition, knowledge, call it what it is, I don't know. But Fred just has done very well for himself. So to say I know how many acres, I haven't a clue.
Okay.
I do not know. He and his brother and Adam farm together. Adam is still learning and still helping out, but right now Fred and Alan have acreage together. Fred and I own acreage together. Alan owns his own. I mean, so Meehling Farms is kind of a mix of everything. Not all eggs are in one basket. And so I have no idea. I have no idea how many acres these guys farm or who has however many acres. I very quickly said Fred was doing this before I buried him. He knows this. And it's best if I just keep my mouth shut and he and his brother work it out. So we you know what? It's worked. It's worked over the years.
That's the best thing.
I don't put in my 2 cents because it's really just 2 cents, and they really don't need my 2 cents. They have bigger fish to fry.
I want to ask you've obviously had some hobbies over the years. I know music is probably one of your most dominant. But are there other things that you have had as maybe a collection or hobbies that you had started youth and still have?
Well, I became real active in the church, mainly because, again, I wanted to be close to my kids. I kind of picked up where my mom had left off with Girl Scouts. You know, she was my Girl Scout leader for years. I was a Girl Scout through up through high school, and so I became a Girl Scout leader. So my daughter was in Girl Scouts for several years, and she was active in volleyball and track, and she did a little bit of cheerleading. She did a little bit of dance squad and that sort of thing. But she was just very active. She always had something to do. Matt, on the other hand, was always involved with the theater here in town. He was one of the ones that started up the TNT troupe, and that was Teens in Theater. So very active with the Phoenix Theater here in Marshall. And he was also, again, very active in band, anything from concert band to marching band to pep band and jazz band. I mean, he was very big in that. So Matt's talents were in that area, very good. He played trumpet. So I was always kind of supportive in the kids and those things. When Matt went off to Rose-Hulman, he became very active in the theater over there. Somehow I would get a phone call, Mom, you think you could bring us food for our dress rehearsal night and things like that. So I never quit being the mom. So I'd show up with food, and I was the mom that saved the day, and got my star for the day, and felt good that I was able to help out my son.
You didn't have to be on stage to do
it. Nope. So, but it was funny because the theater, when Matt started in the theater, I had kind of gotten involved at one point with the melodrama that used to go on here every September, the Fall Festival, Autumn Fest. Everybody, was always looking forward to that. So I got involved with the melodrama. I, got to tap into some of that, and beyond that, I mean, they've done other little, productions of, on a smaller scale, anything from dinner theater to stuff like that. So not as much lately. I probably quit that the year that my mom passed away. She passed away in August, and of course the melodrama would have been in September. Yeah. So I haven't done melodrama since then. August 3rd of 2003, Mom passed away.
You've had a few other things to do and to keep your time occupied.
Yeah. So I haven't been as involved with that, but I have been involved with the youth at church. That, I mean, the youth was always important to me. I started seeing where the youth needed a place to go that they could talk about things and learn about their church and learn about life in general. Because, I mean, you have to have faith to be able to get from day to day. And I think it's important that the youth understand that, things don't happen just for a reason. And so I became very involved with the youth, starting out with Matt, and then, of course, when Amanda was going through school, too. And in 2000, Sister Therese McKinnon said, we need to take kids to a World Youth Day. Of course, at this point, I was a small town girl. I didn't know anything about a World Youth Day. Didn't know what that was. Inquired with her, what is it? Where is it? Kind of explain a little bit about it. And she says, well, it's in Rome, Italy this year. It's the Jubilee. And we need to take a group of kids there. And I just looked at her like she was crazy. How do we do this? I said, well, when is it? And she says, well, I think at that time it was in July, I think, that year. Well, this is the beginning of that year. It's the beginning of 2000. And I'm thinking, how are we going to do this? This is January. She says, well, I'm talking to a group out of St. Louis. I think we could probably tag along with them and join up with their group. Fine, okay. So she started her work, and I'm starting to try to inquire about this still. I didn't know very much about it, but thought I was intrigued by the idea. All I can say is that trip, God had his hand in it, because no other way could 3 youth and 3 parents, 3 mothers, attend with their kids. I mean, 6 of us went. And that was my first World Youth Day. So we joined up with the St. Louis Diocese and went with them. And there were 3 busloads of people from that diocese that we joined up with. And we learned a lot about what World Youth Day is, and how to maneuver through the crowds and learn about a new country. And I wasn't opposed to learning about a new country, because I had actually traveled to Germany and Austria in 1978 with the choral group that I was in, which was a community choral group, and that I was a part of prior to moving to Illinois. And in fact, that group actually sang at Fred's and my wedding, and called the Decatur Civic Chorus. But so I had done traveling overseas, but this was just with the church and the youth, and it was just all inspiring. And
certain amount of vibrancy with something like
that. It was.
How many youth trips have you gone on?
Well, I missed the one in Toronto, and I think that was in 2002 or 2003. Again, there was a lot of things going on in our church at that time. Our church had gone through a fire. We were going through, we had started talking renovation in the church, so there was a lot of things. We ended up having to build a new rectory, and we ended up, after the renovation, we ended up losing our priest, and another one moving in. And that priest we'd become very fond of, because he'd been here for several years. So a lot of things were going on at that time, but so we didn't get to Toronto, the closest one, and we never got to that one. But mainly because there was just so much going in our own community, in our own church, that we knew that we couldn't ask for support from our parishioners, because we were already having to support our own little situation in our own little town. So Father Chris Bry came in as the new priest, and I remember, because I was thinking, it's just time for me to back off being involved with the youth in our church. I had been involved very much with the youth group and everything, but I just saw that maybe it was just time for me to start backing off. And he always had this way of knowing, I don't know, he could read me very well. And he threw this packet down and said, hey, take a look at this. I printed this out and want you to look through this. Well, of course, it was all information on the next World Youth Day, which was in Cologne, Germany. Well, as I'm reading through it, I basically cussed him and said, "Damn you." Now, most people don't damn their priest. But I said, "You knew what I was coming in here to tell you today, didn't you?" I haven't a clue what you were coming in here to tell me. I said, "Well, my meeting with you today was to tell you that I was going to quit helping with the youth." And I said, "And you present this to me." It inspired me to stay on working with the youth, plan another World Youth Day. And so we went to World Youth Day in Cologne, Germany, which was another awesome experience. And an awesome experience traveling with Father Chris. I learned a lot about him and about how he travels and how he thinks, and he's not your typical priest, I would say. He's just a very unique gentleman. He really is. But so that was Cologne, Germany. The next one, he pushed on forward, and again, I was still working with the youth. And at this point, in 2005, we did Germany. In 2008, we did Sydney, Australia, another big one. That was a huge trip, because that was going to be over more days, more travel, but another awesome experience with some, wonderful people. And so that was another good one. And then after that, Father Chris, of course, had moved on to another area, and I was left on my own to plan the next one. But he did call me at one point when he was planning his youth to go, and he says, "Julia, when you get ready to look into the housing, let's talk." Well, I said, "Sure." I mean, I had a small group going, and so we ended up
At Rio?
No, that was actually Madrid, Spain.
Madrid.
And so we did Madrid, Spain in 2011, and basically had another awesome experience. We ended up deciding to rent apartments instead of do hotel or motel rooms. And it absolutely worked out wonderfully. His group met up with my group. We still went our separate ways, but we actually came together we would have mass in like the largest apartment there. We would all gather and have mass before we would go out for the day, or when we came in of an evening, we would have mass. So we actually did come together and hang out a little bit together, but primarily we went our separate ways and did our separate things while we were attending that World Youth Day. And the next one, again, he liked the ideas, and he was planning his trip, and I said, "Well, I've got a few little people that are going, and we'd like to rent another apartment." He said, "Well, I've already worked with ours, and we're renting an apartment." So we didn't get together. We had the same idea, but we really didn't get together that much at that time. We had joined up with the Effingham group and had traveled with them. They ended up staying in a different place, but we went to Rio and actually spent a wonderful time in Rio, Brazil, and absolutely had another awesome experience with another World Youth Day. And what's interesting is, in those World Youth Days that I've been to, I have actually been able to experience 3 different popes. And there's nothing like being in the presence of a pope. Yeah. I don't care if he looks like he's a half a mile away from you and looks like a dot on a stage. There is just an awesome presence when you're in the vicinity of a pope. There's just nothing better. And having all those youth and people from your church that is from the world, it's just so inspiring.
Julia, with all of the modern conveniences we have, and we look around our home and our house, surrounding area, is there some modern convenience that you'd say, "I just couldn't live without that"?
Oh my gosh, interesting. Well, I'll tell you, black and white TVs went to colored TVs. This is just in my lifetime. I mean, you never would have heard of what even a computer was back when I was young. I have to say, probably the computer, though.
Really?
And it's mainly because my kids, because they live away, my 2 oldest live far away from me. It would have to be the computer or the phone, like the mobile phone, our modern conveniences of technology. Because I really do. Don't get me wrong. I'm not totally stupid, but I'm not totally smart on the technology. It is one of those things that I appreciate and want to learn, but haven't got there yet. I haven't learned it all, and I'm still learning, but I do tap into the technology. And if I could see my kid's face on a computer screen or a phone screen, I love it. It's really the next best thing to be in there. So,
if you were, say, in that country of Spain, and you were talking to someone, they say, Marshall, what on earth is that? What's that all about? What would you tell them about Marshall? You've been here now long enough to say, why would Marshall be a good place for you to at least visit?
Interesting, because when we do get asked where we live, and we say USA, we've gotten mixed feelings on that. Some of them embrace the USA, and others go, yuck, USA. And again, it's that political arena I don't like playing in. But then their next thing is they would ask, oh, Chicago? And I'm like, no. Because we would tell them we live in Illinois. And of course, everybody equates Chicago with Illinois. And we would say, nope, we're from the southern part of the state, kind of the southern area of the state. It's, actually we live, East Central, and Marshall is a little farming community. Primarily was established on the farming, and, and it's growing in its own little way each and every day, but we're just from a little town. But I tell you, Marshall, since I've lived here, has grown. Of course, there's more businesses that have come in. I've seen businesses come and go. But I like what we have here. I actually have grown to love the small town. Not that I ever didn't like it, but I've learned to love it. And when I've gone and traveled and I come back, and I'm, coming back from Indianapolis airport and traveling back in, you just kind of look at the homes around and you think, home. It's just like putting on a good old pair of shoes and settling into your comfies, your comfy clothes or whatever. It's just, it's home. It's my home, and it's where I feel comfortable now. And Marshall has a lot. I mean, there's, to know that, we have a little theater, or we have a school that has, a marching band and a football team, or just knowing that there's Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts here in town, just knowing we have a band concert on Friday nights, that still gathers people, from around the community. There's clubs that basically bring people together, anything from the Rotary to the Lions to the Optimist Club to, anything with the farming. I mean, there's all kinds of 4-H clubs and things that, so there's just something for everybody. There's really something for everybody. And where we live, if you need a taste of the big city, St. Louis is to the west, Indy's to the east, Chicago's to the north. You can go south wherever. You can go as far as Nashville. It's only about 4.5 hours away. We're right in the middle and the heart of everything. So if we ever get an inkling or a hungering for something, it's there. It's just in a few hours' reach.
Well, Julia, you've given a very interesting background of your life, and that's exactly what we were looking for. It's been a pleasure visiting with you. And this is not just for someone to listen to or read tomorrow, but it's there for the future. And that's exactly what this is called, oral history. And you've given a very good history of your background.
Well, hopefully.
We certainly appreciate your time and your participation in this project.
Thank you. It's
Good
been a
to be
pleasure.
with you.